In the chronicles of imperial decline, the end of a state is often narrated with images of cannon smoke, marching battalions, and sieges. Yet the Ottoman Empire, the great Eurasian polity that for centuries cast a shadow over Europe and the Middle East, was in large part undone not only by armies, but by ledgers. It was not only guns that unstitched its fabric, it was interest and creditors. This is the tale of the first modern debt trap, how a once mighty empire was slowly suffocated by foreign finance, and how the lenders of London and Paris conquered without conquest. It's a stark reminder that control can be exercised not just through force, but through finance, that a mortgage can be more decisive than a garrison. To understand how this unfolded, we need to return to the mid-19th century Ottoman world. From a map's distance, the Ottoman Sultanate still looked formidable. Its frontier ran from the Balkans to the deserts of Arabia, from the Black Sea coasts to the North African shorelines. The Sultan in Istanbul still ruled millions and sat on an ancient throne at one of history's crossroads. But beneath the ceremonial robes and mosques, the state's fiscal structure was rotting. While Britain and France raced through the Industrial Revolution, steam engines, railways, telegraphs, modern factories, the Ottoman economy remained overwhelmingly agrarian and pre-industrial. It relied largely on peasant cultivation and artisanal production. Taxation was archaic and rent-seeking. Provincial collectors and local notables diverted large portions of revenue long before it reached the central treasury. Traditional short-term fixes, debasement of coinage, confiscation of elite wealth, had worked in earlier centuries. By the 19th century, they no longer sufficed. The empire needed capital to modernize, to create railways and telegraph lines, to sustain a modern army that could face expansionist Russia. But where could it turn for that scale of financing? The answer, painfully, would be the money markets of Western Europe. For cultural and religious reasons, and for prudent self-reliance, the Ottomans had long resisted large-scale foreign borrowing. There was a reluctance toward usury and a political aversion to dependence on Christian sovereigns. But in 1853, the geopolitical reality overwhelmed tradition. The Crimean War broke out. Tsarist Russia moved southward, perilously close to Ottoman territories. Britain and France, alarmed by Russian ambitions, intervened on the Ottoman side. Their intervention was military, fleets into the Black Sea, troops into the Crimea, and it brought bankers as well as bayonets. War is costly, and the Ottoman treasury could not meet the bills. Under Sultan Abdülmecid I, the empire accepted emergency capital. In 1854, a syndicate of British and French financiers arranged the first major foreign loan for the Ottoman government. For the Ottoman court, the cash seemed like salvation. Troops could be paid, munitions could be procured, the crisis might be averted. But the terms were harsh. The loans were issued at steep discounts. The bond market price might be set so that when the Sultan signed for a nominal £100 of debt, he actually received only £80 in cash. The 20% difference covered underwriting fees, commissions, and risk premia. Yet the interest obligations were calculated on the full face value. In effect, the Ottomans were borrowing on terms that left them much less liquidity than their liabilities suggested, and they were paying interest on the larger amount. That accounting imbalance was the first deep fissure. The initial wartime capital did save Baghdad's coffers in the short term, and the Ottomans managed to remain in the war. The conflict ended in 1856. But the appetite for foreign credit had been opened. Having seen that a signature in Istanbul could summon gold from London, the imperial court found the allure hard to resist. The Sultan and the elites desired the visible signs of modernity they saw in European capitals: gaslit boulevards, grand opera houses, monumental public architecture. So borrowing continued, and the proceeds were often spent on prestige rather than on productive investment. The most notorious example of imperial conspicuous consumption is the Dolmabahçe Palace. Sultan Abdülmecid commissioned a new imperial residence on the Bosphorus designed to rival Versailles and symbolically signal Ottoman civilization and power. The palace is a testament to 19th century opulence, vast quantities of gold leaf, baccarat crystal staircases, immense chandeliers, vast marble halls, and Italian ateliers commissioned for decoration. It is a dazzling building and a fiscal calamity. The construction cost was many millions of Ottoman gold lira, a sum that represented a substantial share of annual state revenues. To finance such expenditures, the Sultan returned repeatedly to European markets. Loans in 1855, 1858, 1860, and onward. Each time, Western bankers were happy to underwrite new issues because underwriting fees were lucrative and because they assumed that the strategic importance of the Ottoman state made a default unlikely, that governments like Britain and France would step in to stabilize matters if necessary. That assumption encouraged what we now call moral hazard. Over the remainder of the century, the Ottoman borrowing pattern took on the contours of a Ponzi cycle. The empire's revenues were insufficient to service existing coupons, so it took new issues to meet interest payments on old debt. Year by year, the budget became increasingly consumed by debt servicing, where early on, perhaps a modest share of income went to interest. By the 1860s, debt service had ballooned. Recurring estimates show that by 1870, a huge proportion, perhaps around half, of the imperial revenue was devoted to paying creditors. That meant less and less money for armies, navies, schools, roads, or anything that might raise productive output. When shortfalls were acute, Istanbul turned to the Galata financiers, the local merchant banker houses clustered in the Galata quarter, many of them Armenian, Greek, and Levantine families who had links to European commerce. Their rates were punishingly high, short-term loans at double-digit annual percentages, sometimes 18 or 20%. This avalanche of expensive, short-term credit further strained the treasury. Sultan Abdülmecid, who followed Abdülmecid, was a monarch given to grand gestures. He ordered a modern ironclad fleet and contracted heavy ordnance from Krupp, in effect trying to buy a navy on credit. For a time, the Ottoman fleet looked impressive on paper, but the state could not afford fuel, maintenance, or crews. Ships rusted in the Golden Horn. They were symbols of vanity, financed by borrowed money. Global finance delivered a decisive blow in 1873. A major banking panic in Vienna triggered a worldwide economic slump, sometimes called the Long Depression. Capital markets tightened, lenders reined in new commitments. At the very moment borrowers most needed refinancing, credit dried up. Simultaneously, calamity struck the Ottoman agricultural base. Severe droughts ravaged Anatolia in 1873-74, causing crop failures, livestock losses, and famine. The peasantry, the principal taxpayers, saw incomes collapse. Tax takings plunged. The state's revenue collapsed while debt service was fixed and immovable. By 1875, the arithmetic was stark. A large bond redemption fell due in October, and the treasury had no means to cover it. The Grand Vizier and ministers faced an impossible choice: starve the population by extracting every coin to pay foreign bondholders, or default. On October 6, 1875, the government issued what became known as the Decree of Ramadan, a moratorium in polite diplomatic language, a partial default in blunt financial terms. The Ottoman government announced it would pay only half of a scheduled coupon in cash, with the remainder deferred. For European investors, widows' savings invested in exotic high-yield securities among them, the news was catastrophic. French shopkeepers and British vicars who had bought Ottoman bonds lost large portions of their savings, and newspapers in Paris and London thundered against Turkish perfidy. Financial default weakened the empire's political standing as much as its balance sheet. Russia, which had sought opportunities to expand in the Balkans and the Caucasus, seized the moment. In 1877, war erupted between the Tsar's forces and the Ottomans. The Ottoman armies, chronically underpaid and under-provisioned, were at a severe disadvantage. The Russians advanced deep into the Balkans to the approaches of Istanbul. The subsequent peace settlement enforced severe territorial losses under the Treaty of San Stefano and later the Congress of Berlin, and the Ottomans faced additional fiscal burdens. The financial terms and the indemnities and costs of the conflict compounded an already ruinous debt situation. Having proved chronically insolvent, the Ottoman administration found itself at the mercy of its creditors. But British and French statesmen were not eager to annex and administer Ottoman provinces directly. Colonial conquest would have been expensive and messy. Instead, they devised a subtler instrument of domination. In 1881, a bilateral arrangement established the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, OPDA, a structure that placed the collection and allocation of certain Ottoman revenues under foreign oversight. The OPDA was more than a trusteeship, it was an extraterritorial financial agency run by representatives of European creditor nations. It effectively appropriated specific tax streams, salt taxes, tobacco duties, stamp taxes, customs surcharges, and revenues from monopolies, and diverted them to service bondholders in London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, and Vienna.
The OPDA built its own administrative machinery, complete with officials, agents, warehouses, and inspectors. It became, in practice, a parallel state. Where the Ottoman bureaucracy had been corrupt and inefficient, the OPDA was organized, bureaucratic, and, for purposes of creditors, effective. It improved salt mines, regulated duties, and sometimes even supplied improved inputs to producers. But this technocratic efficiency served the creditors first. Between 1881 and the outbreak of World War I, the OPDA appropriated roughly one-third of the empire's total tax receipts and sent that revenue abroad. 1 in 3 coins minted or collected were consumed by debt service and remitted to foreign bondholders. That left the Ottoman government with 2/3 of a shrunken tax base to run a huge multi-ethnic empire, field armies, and conduct diplomacy. The result was perpetual fiscal penury. Inadequate schools, stunted industrial development, weak public health, a polity that could not invest in its own modernization because interest payments bled off any surplus. The OPDA also signified a form of political interference. Control of revenues meant influence over policy. In effect, European banks and governments could leverage fiscal instruments to secure preferred outcomes in Constantinople without the costs of outright colonization. Sovereignty eroded. The sultans were rulers in name, but their financial autonomy had been compromised. While Britain and France focused on extracting revenue, a new player entered the field with a different strategy: Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II offered friendship and infrastructure, not just loans for palace building, but industrial projects aimed at integrating Ottoman space into a German-dominated economic orbit. The centerpiece was the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, a grand project to link the heart of Europe to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf, bypassing the Suez Canal and promising access to oil and markets. To Ottoman leaders weighed down by debt and pressured by European creditors, German loans and engineering expertise seemed a route to revitalization and strategic backing. German financing, principally through Deutsche Bank and German industrial firms, poured capital into railway construction and related concessions. But the contracts came with onerous terms: guaranteed profits per kilometer laid, concessions over mineral and hydrocarbon rights near the lines, and legal privileges that enhanced German economic control. The result was a new cycle of indebtedness, a pivot of Ottoman economic dependence from Franco-British financial centers toward Berlin. German engineers, rail managers, and military advisors occupied high-grade positions in Ottoman institutions. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman economy had become a patchwork of foreign economic enclaves, and German presence in particular had strategic implications that alarmed Britain and France. Debt thus became a cause, not merely a symptom, of geopolitical rivalry. Economic entanglements over finance, railways, and concessions heightened strategic competition in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East, contributing to the complex web of tensions that fed into the outbreak of World War I.
When the Great War dawned in 1914, Ottoman leaders, including the Young Turks, made a fateful choice. seeking to break the shackles of foreign financial control, and believing a German victory could overturn creditor dominance, they allied with the Central Powers. One of the first acts in the war was symbolic. The Ottomans expelled foreign directors from the OPDA offices in Istanbul and halted payments to some creditors. For a brief moment, the empire tried to reassert fiscal independence. The gamble collapsed along with the larger war effort. The Ottoman war machine failed. The empire disintegrated on the battlefield, its Arab provinces and most of its European territories taken or broken away. In the post-war settlement, the successor states faced a new reality. The European powers insisted that the debts of the old imperial entity be recognized and apportioned. At the Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, the new Republic of Turkey under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk negotiated hard, but the outcome still included recognition of certain pre-existing financial obligations. Ataturk's government, determined to secure international legitimacy and integrated trade relations, agreed to assume a portion of the Ottoman debt, restructure it, and begin repayments under new terms. Thus, a remarkable historical arc closes. The monarchy that had borrowed in the mid-19th century left a fiscal legacy that the Republican successor had to manage and amortize. It took decades. Turkey's last payment on the Ottoman public debt arrived on May 25, 1954, nearly a century after the first Crimean War Loans had been arranged. It was a centenarial footnote to a long financial dependency. The Ottoman experience offers a powerful lesson about leverage and sovereignty. The sultans imagined that foreign capital could buy a rapid modernization and radar-like prestige. Instead, borrowing without productive reinvestment converted revenue streams into collateral for foreign creditors, hollowed out the state, and turned the empire into a tributary space for external financial interests. The Dolmabahçe's gilded halls and the rusting ironclads were more than monuments. They were testimony that prestige financed on debt can undermine the political and social bases necessary for long-run survival. What the European creditors did was not necessarily malevolent in the short run. They sought repayment of legitimate obligations and organized systems that assured bondholders of income. But the net effect was to transfer real resources from Ottoman provinces into European pockets by design and by institutional structure. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration, efficient and even modern in administration, functioned as a colonial-like extractor, a state within a state that ensured cash flowed outwards. The longer-term result was predictable. A polity that could not invest in productive capacity or public welfare is far more vulnerable to internal breakdown, external predation, and political failure. If there is a single arresting moral from this history, it is that sovereign control is tightly bound to fiscal independence. Lending terms, institutions of debt collection, and foreign-controlled revenue streams can, in aggregate, deprive a nation of the capacity to govern itself effectively. Sovereignty exists not simply in flags and treaties, but in balance sheet health. Where a state cannot meet its obligations without surrendering its revenue sources, its independence is, in practice, compromised. The Ottoman Empire did not die overnight on a battlefield. It was emptied out ledger by ledger, compelled to surrender the fruits of its production to foreign claimants, then pushed into geopolitical dependency that made territorial losses almost inevitable. Its fall is a cautionary tale for the modern era. The instruments of finance, bonds, loans, and the institutions that enforce them can be deployed to reshape polities in ways as consequential as any military conquest. I'm John, and this is the Documentary History Hub channel. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and keep thinking in historical scale, subscribe now, because when history's ledgers are opened, you'll want to be among those who spotted the signs early.